Did you know that the white grape cultivar of Muscat d'Alexandrie, or Muscat of Alexandria, is the only Vitis vinifera grape in the entire world to be indigenous to Africa? It comes from the northern part of the continent and gets its name from its connection to the Egyptian city of Alexandria, where ancient Egyptians used to use the grape in their winemaking. All the way down on the polar opposite end of Africa, in South Africa, Muscat of Alexandria is also the cultivar that makes up the oldest living vineyard on the continent, which is on a little farm called Gevonden near the town of Rawsonville in the winemaking region of the Breedekloof. The vineyard was planted in 1883, which is before phylloxera even hit South Africa, so it's one of the few that managed to survive through that travesty. Of course, Muscat of Alexandria has also been grown fairly wide in Europe. In Spain and in Portugal, it gets called Moscatel. And then in the south of Italy, it gets called Zabibo. But then as you travel further north, especially in Piedmont, it gets called Muscato. And you probably would have heard this name in connection with the wine Muscato d'Asti, which comes from the region of Asti. It also makes some really lovely sweet wines down in the south of France. Now, the reason that we're discussing Muscat today is because the hand drink solo wine of the day is the Maanschijn Brunch Club Dry White Blend, which is more than a third Muscat and is made by the winemaking partners of Paul Hoogwerf and Doug Mylrea. Maanschijn, when translated from Dutch, means moonlight. It's a fairly young winemaking outfit that has their cellar in a small, quaint heritage building right at the very base of the Maanschijn Kop Peak, which is in the wine district of Walker Bay, down on the southern end of the African continent. The Maanschijn wine range is refreshingly simple because it really is just 2 white blends, 2 red blends, and a Méthode Ancestrale sparkling wine. Now, both Paul and Doug are massive fanboys of the classic aromatic cultivars like Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc and Muscat and Viognier. But they do understand that in order to really build a full blend, you need the slightly more broader shouldered classic cultivars like Chardonnay and Semillon. The Maanschijn Brunch Club Dry White Blend is an absolutely fascinating little beastie that is made up of 35% Muscat of Alexandria, and then there's a third Chardonnay, a third Semillon, and just less than 10% Viognier. Now, just the Muscat and the Viognier together are a veritable wild ride because Muscat positively explodes with floral aroma. Now, just the Muscat and the Viognier alone have the potential to be an absolute veritable wild ride because Muscat explodes with sweet grapey notes and citrus and jasmine florals and apricot, and then Viognier, which can be supremely extroverted in its own right, has these really rich layered stone fruit notes with peach blossom, marzipan, raw almond. And if that wasn't chaotic enough, we then discover that the 35% Muscat of Alexandria is macerated and fermented on skins. The skins are in contact with the juice for a total of 18 days. So now you add boatloads of texture to an already chaotic aromatic winescape. It really is an audacious blend, to be sure, but then again, that is part of the appeal. But bizarre cultivar mix aside, the most striking element to this wine is a previously unmentioned super concentrated portion of unadulterated nostalgia. Because when one eventually gets into the glass and gives it a sniff, well, I mean, one is practically spirited away. I feel like I'm in that climactic scene in Ratatouille where Anton Ego is practically astral traveling back to his childhood to re-experience his fondest sensory memory. Because the aroma that pops out of the glass can really only be described as juice box breakfast punch. Now, some people have tried to call it Capri Sun, and others have perhaps connected with memories of cardboard cartons of fruit cocktail. But whatever it is that you want to call it, the end result is the same, which is a kind of mental swirl of oranges and apricots and pineapple and passion fruit. And the integration of all these aromas is really so complete that it's almost impossible to try and tease out where one cultivar begins and the next one ends. This is one blend where the whole is really greater than the sum of its parts. And when we finally get around to giving it a sip, well, the palate really doesn't let up either. And this is where I think the Chardonnay partially comes into play, because you have this absolute live wire green apple acidity. Then there is juicy citrus. There is that herbal lemongrass note and so much texture, it's ridiculous. Now the texture is obviously triggered by that skin contact muscat, but all those tropical notes that are kind of a result of all the cultivars mixing together come down and present themselves on the palate every bit as convincingly as they did on the aromas. I think what I love most about this wine is that it feels like the Maanschijn guys set out to produce a wine that would have been an easy, light, aromatic, quaffing wine that you can have in the summer on the terrace. And then almost by accident, they dramatically over-delivered and ended up producing a rather intense, textured, layered, supremely concentrated spectacle of joy. I mean, the more light-hearted juice box mirth definitely is in there, but there is so much character to this wine, and to be honest, it exhibits pretty much all of the characteristics of a high-quality wine. Intensity, length, complexity. Now, admittedly, this might be a bit much for some because it really is a wild ride, especially as it begins to warm in the glass. But a fascinating point for those who think that this wine is perhaps a little too sweet. You might have your mind blown to realize that there is only 1.7 grams of residual sugar in this entire wine, which means that all of that intense, wild, overt, tropical fruit comes purely from these really concentrated volatile aromas and has absolutely nothing to do with any sugar in the wine. Wait. This last point may at least be of intellectual value, even if you didn't so much enjoy the inevitable journey down memory lane to a simpler time of juice box and jam samis. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. So if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the Handling Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars coming out of the dynamic South African winelands.